Drum roll. Question 3, the Tinker question. So I'll read that for the benefit of the full audience. You certainly know this question. And then just a reminder, at the conclusion of this, you'll have your opening statement. Please put your notes away at the end of your opening statement. It has been 50 years since the landmark case of Tinker versus Des Moines. Quote, "It can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate," unquote. Since Tinker, have the rights of students in public schools been expanded or limited? Another quote, "If the time has come when pupils of state-supported schools, kindergartens, grammar schools, or high schools can defy and flout orders of school officials to keep their minds on their own schoolwork, it is the beginning of a new revolutionary era of permissiveness in this country fostered by the judiciary," unquote. That's a dissent from Justice Hugo Black in Tinker. Do you agree or disagree with that dissent? Why or why not? And finally, should students suspected or accused of breaking school rules have the same due process rights as juveniles or adults accused of crimes? Explain your position. You may begin.
Within the 50 years after the 1969 Supreme Court case, Tinker v. Des Moines' decision that students nor teachers shed their constitutional right of freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gates, the right of students who attend public schools have been expanded with certain parameters.
The ruling of the Tinker case did not allow limitless expression in speech to public school children. It did, however, decide that the right to freedom of expression within schools must be balanced with the need to keep order within the school.
In this case, the students wearing armbands only caused discussion outside of the classroom, but no interference with work and no disorder.
Ultimately, the rights of students have been expanded as long as their actions are in a polite and reasonable manner. Students who fail to realize that schools should be left as serious work environments will find that their rights will be strongly limited.
Tinker established the disruption test, which legally helps distinguish what can and should be restricted by the school systems. This helps students who choose to peacefully express themselves within the school setting from being punished under partisan pretenses.
This test differentiates the line of acceptability, allowing students with armbands to protest while being able to have grounds to punish a student like Matthew Frazier from Bethel School District v. Frazier for reading a speech filled with vulgar sexual innuendos.
Similarly, it allows schools to suspend students who advocate illegal drug use and poor decision-making, such as the case of Frederick V. Morse, when Joseph Frederick displayed a banner outside of a school's function that said "Bong hits for Jesus."
The 1985 New Jersey versus TLO case is another example of constitutionally protected rights for students.
Within this case, the court established the fact that the legitimate expectation of privacy are to be counterbalanced with the school's need to maintain an environment in which learning can take place.
The rights of the students in this case were expanded by stating that these searches cannot be arbitrary and the advisors who search students' belongings must have reasonable suspicion.
We strongly disagree with Justice Hugo Black's statement regarding armbands being a distraction to students in schools in the Tinker case. While yes, students have limited rights in a school setting, such as the limited freedom of expression with use of dress codes, the government still cannot strip away our rights entirely. They cannot strip away silent our voices. Our nation needs to acknowledge younger voices because we are the future.
If adolescents are taught not to speak out against what they believe to be wrong or right, then when we eventually fill our government positions, no changes will occur, no improvements made to better our society. Because if we are taught that our voices do not matter, then why would we think we could make a change?
And if no one listens to us, then why should we listen to our future constituents should we take office? On the other hand, however, we believe students should not have unlimited free speech.
Like in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, public schools where toilet paper and nooses were found, this use of expression has been highly offensive to especially the black students of these schools, forcing the horrifying memories of public lynching to resurface and remind us of what was America's darkest years after slavery was abolished.
The students should be able to exercise their constitutional rights, but only to the extent that everyone in the school remains safe.
While we believe children in public schools should receive the same due process as a juvenile or adult, we also believe that it is up to the school to give these rights to the students in a way that is not disruptive to the learning environment.
With due process, students would be given punishments that would be lesser and would better fit their indiscretions. The Fifth Amendment says that no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law.
This should be upheld in schools as well as everyday life. Children at school are parented by administration, best described by the doctrines of in loco parentes, meaning school is parent, and parents patriae, meaning state is parent.
This means teachers and administrators act more as parental figures instead of police authorities. As Chief Justice John Roberts said, the First Amendment serves a purpose. It is not just there because the framers thought it was in general a good idea. It provides access to information and allows people in a free society to make judgments about what their government is up to.
Due process in schools should be similar to adults and juveniles, but the direction it is handled in schools should be different.
Thank you for listening to our testimony. We are now ready for your questions.
Great. So you mentioned a lot about that, about administrators and their roles in this entire thing. Now, schools across the country are different, right? There are thousands of school districts, Maryland, Utah, Alabama, elsewhere. Shouldn't the courts defer to administrators in general to allow them to create disciplinary codes that fit their schools best?
Well, we do agree that around the country there is a different political socialization for different areas in the country. Yes, southern states might disagree with northern states or vice versa. And I just believe that even though we might have different opinions, what is wrong is wrong. And just because some area might agree that racial slurs or something like that might be okay in that area, I don't think it should be allowed anywhere. So I think it should be a uniform around the nation.
I agree with my colleague in that, yes, every area is different. Like, there might be in downtown Baltimore, there might be different than uptown, something like that. But also because there's just, as our country, we need to know what is right and wrong, and I think we all need to have a moral compass that is equal to each other's.
I'm curious about this idea that you keep bringing up about offensive speech. Isn't offensive speech protected political speech? Or where is the boundary between something that's offensive and protected versus something that's not offensive? And who gets to decide?
I think it's what defines offensive or not is sort of the culture you're submerged in. So obviously down south, some words might be deemed acceptable rather than if you're up north, but it doesn't mean they're okay to say. They're just more commonly known. And I think
words that it can be deemed like offensive and stuff, or something that could enrage or like cause violence, like that's what should be like the line of deciding if like those words are offensive, if they cause like a riot or violence in a school setting, of course, but also in like a social setting, like if it's causing violence, then I feel like that should be like where we deem words to be violent or offensive.
If you look at the Skokie case where you had the Nazis marching in a very Jewish town, or even just with the Westboro Baptist Church protesting at veterans' funerals, or even just the Charlottesville riots that recently occurred, those all caused, the Skokie didn't cause as much violence, but the Charlottesville riots, it caused a lot of violence to happen. Heather Heyer was killed in those riots, and I think we have to the Supreme Court especially has to rule on whether or not the offensiveness draws the line at disruption to the point of violence and people getting injured and killed.
I'd love to hear y'all go the whole 10 minutes with her on that question. Talk a minute about the practice of religion in schools. There's a wide variety of questions lately, ranging from time of day that certain religions need to practice all the way to, in some cases in the South, where some denominations were against vaccination and didn't want their students to be vaccinated, but they want them in the schools. What role, how far can a school board go in determining how to regulate that?
I feel with like the vaccinations and everything, I feel like that is up to the school board because all children are in a public setting, and if you do not vaccinate, like if some students are not vaccinated and others are infected with that, then it could cause an outbreak of that situation, which would be like bad for the school board because their students wouldn't be in school and it would cause disruption in that form. But I feel that in like a religious practice, if you have to pray at some point in the day, then I feel like it is, if you're leaving class by yourself, then I feel like that is not a disruption for the whole school.
I agree with my colleague, but also that with the vaccinations, if it's against your religion or something, just morals, because I know a lot of parents don't agree with the flu vaccine just because they're not 100% sure like what's in it. I think it's more up to the parent whether or not your child, because it is their child, receives the vaccine or not. And it is obviously an issue with if there's like a flu outbreak or something. But I think, and down the line, it's up to the parent, because even though in Locos Parentis, where the administration is in charge of the child, the parent is in charge of their health.
I strongly believe that there has to be a separation of church and state. So I feel like school boards shouldn't theoretically be able to tell someone you have to get vaccinated to come to a public school. However, I think at that point where you start to see it could put many other children's lives in danger, you have to realize there has to be a stopping point. And while I would love to see a separation of church and state, especially in a modern day age where people can practice whatever they want as far as religion, I think it comes down to the betterment of the good over than just one person.
How do you think social media has changed this whole discussion?
Well, social media has opened up a new realm where people are advocating directly with each other through the internet, and I think it has helped raise a giant following of people who have come to support, especially in the younger ages, and it has brought a lot of teenagers to start to think about these political motions towards what they believe. And I think especially with the vaccinations, it's pushed a lot of people to like start to think more so past what they want and think of what the whole wants.
I agree with my colleague, and it's also made a lot more people aware of it, because with social media, like there's very few people who aren't on social media, especially in the school system with teenagers, and I think it just makes everyone more aware and be like, hey, maybe ask their parents, be like, why am I not getting this vaccination, and just sort of asking more questions and becoming more informed as citizens.
So should schools have the right to regulate social media?
I feel like if it has to do with something that happened in the school, then I feel like, yes, they have the right to go on there and say something about it, but only if they're,
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, you
Yeah,
can finish.
but only if it's something that happened in the school. But if it's outside of the school, then I feel like they don't have a right to say anything about it.
Thanks.
Okay, you guys did a good job. I have several recommendations for you. First of all, when people get nervous, I do this myself, but when people get nervous, they tend to speak very quickly and they tend to drop their enunciation. So, you know, whatever you have to do, take a deep breath, look at a pretty sunshine outside, whatever. Just slow down a little bit and enunciate your words so that everybody can understand. And again, that's not specific to you. A lot of people do that. I do that myself. Another thing is I would be very careful about this idea of offensive speech, and I might think about it a bit more. And, you know, the government could, in theory, and a school district could, in theory, say that any speech could lead to violence that is politically opposed to what the state is believes is correct. So I would just think a little bit more about this idea of offensive speech and whether schools should regulate it or not.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking about it right now. That business, but I am. I mean, it's a slippery slope, isn't it, when you start? Paul, I think this was the most articulate defense of students' rights that we've heard so far today. I think, at least in case of, I think if everybody could live up to that treatment, some of these questions would be mooted out. But it's the most articulate defense. There were beautiful phrases in your alliterative partisan preferences. Dropping phrases in like that make your head snap up and listen. That was great, right? Ashley is, we've said a couple times today, the greatest gift a person can get in life is the gift of a good teacher. In my soul, you must have one sitting right over there. I know you're proud of him today, but I expect they're proud of you too. I wish every school system and every student body before school started could have a discussion like this with that kind of pulling us through the conversation, did we hadn't gotten some of this stuff resolved. Some of the, you know, we had social media problems. I'm not trying to be funny. This is true. You know, there was bullying and talking about teachers when I was your age. It was just a landline telephone. And, you know, and not a, you know, you remember those phones that you could flip over? I had but this was very enlightening today. Thank you.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed the conversation as well. Very nicely done. You weaved in some key cases into your opening statement and in the Q&A as well, like Fraser, Morris v. Frederick, TLO, the New Jersey case. So that was all very nicely done. One thing that you might be kind of stray away from. I think it's good it's certainly good to have strong opinions on this, absolutely. And I think you set your opinions down, you acknowledged some other competing concerns. That was great. I think on some of the phrases, you might be careful. A couple things I picked up on were like, at one point the panel said like, what is wrong, and like the moral compass of everyone should be equal to one another. But the problem is that like in a country of 320 million people, is that realistic? Like everyone's moral compass is going to be equal to another? I mean, people disagree about what wrong is, you know, and deeply. And so some of that discussion, I think, is really healthy. And I think you acknowledge both sides there. You just want to be careful about those types of phrases. But overall, good job also incorporating contemporary events like Charlottesville as well into it. I thought it was a very nice conversation.
Nice job.